Hi there. This week's theme is environmental justice, and hence we are standing here on location right near the Detroit Incinerator. More about that in a few minutes and why we are here, but I am very proud to introduce one of the leading proponents of environmental justice research, Dr. Elaine Hochman, who is formerly director of the Research Support Lab at Wayne State University and has been an adjunct faculty at the University of Michigan in the School of Natural Resources and Environment, specializing in environmental justice for the last several years. But maybe before we get the story about what Elaine has found, what's about, let's ask Dr. Hochman maybe a little story about how she got into this. So Elaine, how did you get into this work in the first place, and tell me a little of your personal story.
Before I went to Wayne State to the Research Support Laboratory, I worked at ITD, Information Technology Division at the University of Michigan. And an old friend of mine from our graduate student days popped in to see me one day. It was Professor Bunyan Bryant, who was really one of the grandfathers of the environmental justice movement and really important for it. And he had a question about statistics, which is what I would consult on, design and using computers. And he started telling me about what he was doing, and was environmental justice at the time, and asked me if, hey, this is one of the problems, is that we know that minorities and low-income people are overburdened by pollution sources, but the politicians, the powers that be, want proof. How can we study this? So I thought, okay, that sounds like an interesting thing to do. One of the things I was able to do with my work is to join in on topics that I thought were very interesting, rather than just whatever came through the door. So anyway, that's how I got started working with him, thinking about how can we do this. Dr. Bryant and I decided that we would, how could we just study the environmental justice situation to show that things were unjust, actually, is what came out of it. We knew we had data. We knew we could get the census data. That's available for anyone. What we needed was some data on pollution sources. There's a thing called the toxic TRI, the
Toxic release inventory?
Toxic release inventory, yes. I'm also used to calling it by its letters, that I forget what the letters stand for. That is required by the EPA for companies that put out certain amounts of chemicals. So we were able to get a hold of that information. Then with doing a little bit of wheeling and dealing, we were able to get polluting sources from the Department of Environmental Equality, or Department of Environmental Quality, the DEQ, in Michigan, on the sources that were named under the Act 307 at the time, which were potentially or actually hazardous locations. We also were able to, from another source, to get a list of leaky underground storage tanks, or LUSTs, in the state of Michigan. And the one common thread that these all had was zip code. So we were able to link up for each zip code in Michigan the number of Act 307 sites, the number of TRI sites, and the number of LUST sites. Then joined that with the census data to look at minority status and income status, and did analyses to show that indeed there really was an overburdening of these people in these two, in the low-income group and the high minority group. And what our data also showed was that income was less a predictor than race. This was Dr. Bryan's basic hypothesis, that race was a more important predictor of where sites were than income. And our data definitely did show that. And why this was important is that the politicians, manufacturers, industrial people, all would say that it's not race, it's not, it's income. We only, things are more where it's low income and there's no racial component at all. And and the data actually show that it's more a racial problem than a low-income problem where siting is.
Now since then there's a lot has happened since those early days, but before we get into that, Elaine, how would you define environmental justice? And when you look at the different forms of how justice is defined, philosophically, it's distributive justice or restorative justice or social justice. How would you where does environmental justice fit into all that? And more generically, what is environmental justice about? Because it's not only a field of study, but it's also, I think, a form of activism and agent of social change as well, is it not?
With distributive injustice, we can see that a lot by just looking to see where these disamenities are. There are some websites where these have been mapped. The EnviroFacts is one of them, and you may want to look into that. You can see little triangles and circles and everything of all the different kinds of bads, call these things bads, where they're located, and you can see that they usually do bunch, and this area is badly bunched. Procedural justice, that deals basically with hearings. Now, that's a part of the environmental justice movement that I've been involved in and kind of dismayed with. This is where you might be a hearing for the community to speak about a nuisance that's either already in their location or planning to be put into their location. And one of the ones that I worked with was with the deep well injection site in Romulus, and we did quite a few presentations for the people who either ask for the permit or suggest that the permit be accepted or rejected. The community members were all for it, for rejecting this site, but the powers that be in Lansing at that time, the DEQ, said, "Oh, that's nonsense. They can have their deep well," and it went up, and it's had a lot of problems. So, the the procedural justice to me, is the biggest problem, because you're dealing with people who have vested interests and do not really want to address the issues because mostly for financial reasons. Corrective justice is one of the things that we're really into too. Let's clean up these places. They're already cited. They've been spewing whatever for years. Can't we clean it up? And so there's the brownfields efforts going on to clean up some of these places. And the Superfunds, of course that's not funded anymore, but anyway, the Superfunds trying to clean up places too. So there is some work there. But the last one is the social justice aspect of it, and that's the part that I'm the most interested in. And my data usually, and my interests in the research aspects of it all deal basically with the social justice. And for me, that is that everybody should have a decent quality of life.